In 1972, a man is sitting on the wet earth of a jungle clearing on a small Philippine island, listening to a transistor radio. He is 50 years old. He is wearing the remains of an Imperial Japanese Army uniform that he has patched, again and again, with cloth taken from the homes of farmers. The boots on his feet are not the boots he landed in. The rifle across his knees is, however, the same rifle. It has been cleaned, every week, for 28 years. The radio is tuned to a station broadcasting from Tokyo. A man's voice is speaking calmly about baseball, about the weather, about the price of rice. The man in the clearing listens for a moment. Then he turns the dial. It is a trick, he thinks. The Americans have set up a station to imitate Japan. The voices are actors. The baseball scores are fabrications. The war is still on. His name is Hiroo Onoda. The war he is fighting ended 27 years ago. He does not know that yet, and he will not believe it for 2 more years. To understand how a man ends up alone in a jungle, listening to his own country and refusing to hear it, you have to go back to a small house in Kainan, in Wakayama Prefecture, in the spring of 1922. Hiroo Onoda was born there on the 19th of March. He was the third of 7 children in a family that valued order and obedience and the old Meiji virtues of duty. He was a small boy. He was not, by his own account, a particularly impressive student. But he was disciplined and he was quiet and he listened. When he was 17, he left Wakayama and went to work in Hankow in occupied China for a Japanese trading company. He danced in the evenings. He learned a little Chinese. He was a young man living abroad with money in his pocket and a future he had not yet thought too hard about. In 1942, the future found him. The army drafted him. He was sent home to Japan and then to officer training and then, because he had performed well, to a place that very few Japanese citizens had ever heard of. It was called the Nakano School. The Nakano School was Japan's secret academy. It trained intelligence officers in guerrilla warfare, sabotage, languages, and survival behind enemy lines. The men who graduated from Nakano were taught a particular kind of loyalty. They were taught that the soldier who dies easily is of no use to the empire. They were taught that the most important thing a man could do, in the worst possible circumstances, was to stay alive and keep fighting until ordered by name to stop. In December of 1944, Hiroo Onoda, 22 years old, was sent to a small island in the Philippines called Lubang. Lubang sits about 90 kilometers southwest of Manila. It is mountainous in the interior, dense with jungle, ringed by a thin coast of fishing villages. By the time Onoda arrived, the war in the Pacific was already lost, though Tokyo had not yet said so. His orders were given to him in person by an officer named Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. The words of those orders Onoda would carry with him for 30 years. You are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. You are forbidden to surrender. It may take 3 years. It may take 5 years. We will come for you. Until then, every Japanese soldier on the island is under your command. It was, in the language of the Nakano School, a standfast order. It was the kind of order a man does not break. It is the kind of order a man cannot break, because the entire architecture of his life has been built to obey it. In February of 1945, American forces landed on Lubang. Most of the Japanese garrison was killed or surrendered within days. Onoda and a handful of men, perhaps 50 at first, vanished into the mountains. By 1949, 4 were left. By 1972, 2. By 1974, only 1. For 29 years, Hiroo Onoda lived in the jungle. He moved camp every few days. He ate what he could shoot or steal, bananas, rice taken from farms, occasionally a stolen cow that his men would butcher and dry. He cleaned his rifle. He maintained his ammunition. He kept a careful watch on the trails. And he killed. This part of the story is not romantic. It must be said clearly. Over the course of his 29 years on Lubang, Onoda and his men conducted small-scale guerrilla raids on the Filipino population. They burned rice harvests because they believed the rice was being supplied to enemy forces. They shot at farmers in the fields because they believed those fields were enemy territory. They killed approximately 30 Filipino civilians and police officers. Most of them were farmers. They had names. They had families. They had been trying to harvest a crop or to push armed strangers out of their village. In the Philippines, Onoda was never a folk hero. He was a tragedy that walked through rice paddies with a rifle. The Filipino dead on Lubang are not a footnote to his story. They are part of his story. They are the cost of his orders. The world, meanwhile, was trying to reach him. In 1952, Japanese aircraft began dropping leaflets over Lubang. The leaflets said the war was over. They were signed by his old commanders. They listed his name. Onoda read them. He decided they were forgeries. The phrasing was wrong. The handwriting was off. They were American psychological warfare, he concluded, and he burned them. In 1959, his family came to Lubang. His brother stood at the edge of the jungle with a loudspeaker and called his name. He played recordings of their mother's voice. He left family photographs in clear plastic bags hanging from branches. Onoda heard the loudspeaker. He saw the photographs. He decided that his brother had been captured and brainwashed, and that the photographs had been faked by enemy intelligence. He withdrew deeper into the mountains. Old comrades came. Newspapers were left in caches along trails the soldiers were known to walk. The newspapers described a prosperous, modern, peaceful Japan, full of cars and televisions and baseball games. Onoda read them in his shelter at night. He decided that this, too, was a trick. A defeated Japan, a destroyed Japan, could not look like this. The pictures of Tokyo were too clean. The economy was impossible. Either Japan had been completely conquered and the country in the photographs was a kind of stage set, or the war was being fought now between Japan and America in some other form, a Cold War, and the messages were part of it. He believed, with the discipline of a man who had been trained to believe, that his orders still stood. In October of 1972, Filipino police set an ambush near a stack of burning rice. Two figures emerged from the trees. One of them was Kenshichi Kozuka, Onoda's last surviving companion. Kozuka was killed in the firefight. Onoda escaped into the jungle. He was, for the first time in his 28 years on Lubang, completely alone. He was 50 years old. He had been a soldier for 30 of those years. He had lost everyone he had been sent to command. He kept his rifle clean. He kept his ammunition dry. He maintained, every morning, the routines that had kept him alive. He waited. In February of 1974, a Japanese university student named Norio Suzuki walked into the jungle of Lubang with a backpack and a camera. Suzuki was 24 years old. He was a dropout. He was an eccentric, a romantic, and a person of stubborn imagination. He had announced to friends before leaving Japan that he intended to find 3 things in his lifetime: Lieutenant Onoda, a wild panda, and the abominable snowman. In that order, he walked into the jungle. He sat down in a clearing. He cooked rice over a small fire, and after several days, Onoda walked out of the trees with a rifle pointed at him. Suzuki did not raise his hands. He smiled. He said, in Japanese, Onoda-san, the emperor and the people of Japan are worried about you. They talked in the clearing for several days. Onoda would not surrender. He explained patiently that he was still a soldier, that his orders could only be rescinded by a superior officer of the Imperial Japanese Army. Suzuki nodded. Suzuki took photographs, and Suzuki flew home to Tokyo. The Japanese government located Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. Taniguchi was now in his 60s. He had survived the war. He worked in 1974 as a bookseller. He had not worn a uniform in nearly 30 years. He put one on again. On the 9th of March 1974, Major Taniguchi flew to Lubang and walked into the same jungle clearing. He stood in his uniform, with the bearing of an officer of an army that no longer existed. Onoda stepped out of the trees. He came to attention. Taniguchi read aloud the formal orders rescinding the mission. The war, he said, was over. The Empire of Japan had ceased combat operations in 1945. Lieutenant Onoda was relieved of his command. He was to come home. Onoda saluted. He laid down his Arisaka rifle, 500 rounds of ammunition, several hand grenades, his dagger, and the sword his brother had given him in 1944. He had not fired a weapon for the empire in 29 years past the moment the empire had stopped existing. He was 51 years old. The Philippine president, Ferdinand Marcos, pardoned Onoda for the killings on Lubang. He came home to Japan and found a country he did not recognize. The trains were too fast. The buildings were too tall. The Japan he had served had been replaced by a country that watched baseball on television and bought refrigerators. He was a celebrity for a brief season, and he hated it. He moved to Brazil. He raised cattle on a farm there for many years. He wrote his memoir, No Surrender, in 1974, and it was translated into English the year after. Eventually, he returned to Japan and founded a small survival school for young people. He taught them how to start fires, how to read terrain, how to live with very little. He died in Tokyo on the 16th of January, 2014. He was 91 years old. Norio Suzuki, the strange young man who had walked into the jungle for him, never found his panda or his yeti. He was killed in an avalanche in the Himalayas in 1986, looking characteristically for something else. There is something almost unbearable about Hiroo Onoda's story, and it is not the survival or the discipline or the rifle that fired for 30 years. It is the loyalty. A man so well trained, so completely conditioned, that he could not stop. Not when the leaflets fell from the sky. Not when his brother's voice called his name through the trees. Not when the photographs of a peaceful Tokyo were placed in his hands. He could only stop when one specific man in one specific uniform walked into one specific clearing and used the specific words he had been taught 30 years before to wait for. And in the meantime, the Filipino farmers of Lubang died, one by one, in their fields. They appear in the Philippine police records by name. They were not part of any war. They were simply on land that a soldier from another country still believed he was defending. The cost of orders is sometimes paid for 30 years. Sometimes it is paid by people who were not even alive when the orders were given. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe. There are many more forgotten lives of the Second World War, and we will tell them one at a time with the care they deserve.